So just so that I can get a feel for who's in the room, can you tell me like some of the places that you work, or if you're social workers, if you're in the education system, if you work with criminal justice system, where do you guys come from?
Social workers.
Social workers? How many social workers do I have? It's the best profession in the world, isn't it? Yeah. All right. Any counselors or school counselors at all? Okay. All right. Where else are people from? Nursing? Okay.
Yeah, public health.
Public health? Okay, cool. So how many of you all work directly with clients? Okay. And then how do the rest of you work? Is it more community programming?
Administration.
Admin? Okay. Education? Okay, cool. So now I have a feel for kind of who's in the room. How many of you work with or maybe treat or refer clients to mental health something, whether it's hospital, community, anything like that? Okay. How many of you have some type of mental health knowledge or education or background? Because that'll be important too. Okay. So this presentation is going to be very basic. I hope you weren't trying to get into the science and all of that about brain chemistry and things like that. So again, it's going to be very basic. I'm going to go through some things, and then if we can just kind of relate it to some of your work and things that you do, that would be awesome. Okay? And again, I know we're going to be a little bit more condensed, so there may be some things that I skip over. If you have questions after the presentation is over, I will be here. So don't feel like you need to rush out and you've got questions that go unanswered. Okay? Anybody have questions before we start? Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Cool. So, this screen talks about defining mental health. And then the next screen talks about defining mental illness. One of the things that I want to make sure that we understand, anytime I go out and I talk about mental health, mental illness, I always want people to know that there is a difference. Sometimes people think that they can use those interchangeably. Okay? You cannot. So, there's a difference between mental health and mental illness. What do you think is the difference? Don't jump at the same time, y'all.
Mental health is something everyone needs to be concerned about.
Okay, mental health is something everybody needs to be concerned about. Okay, I saw a hand in the back.
Mental illness is more of to cope like a diagnosis maybe.
Okay, yep, diagnosis. Okay. So the way that I tend to explain it in kind of layman's terms, like all the way down to people, is if you go to the doctor for a checkup, say you go for your annual checkup, the doctor runs all of what they're going to do, they come back in and they tell you, what's your name? Amber. Amber. Says, Amber, you got a clean bill of health. You're good to go until next year. Amber doesn't say, oh my gosh, doctor, what do I need to be doing? How long do I have to live? What's going on? What do I need to do next? Right? Why does Amber not say that? Because the doctor said what? You're healthy, right? So everything checked out. When there's an illness, that means that something is not working the way that it should. That means that something isn't functioning. Maybe there is some type of a deficiency, something that needs to be checked a little bit further. That is how we define the difference between mental health and mental illness. So when you're mentally healthy, that means that everything's going well. Everything's checking out. You can get up every day pretty much and do what you need to do. You can get dressed, you can make your breakfast, you can get in your car, you can go to work or wherever it is you're going, and you don't really have any struggles doing that. Does that make sense? When there's mental illness, there may be some sort of hindrance, right? You may be able to get up, right? But you're dragging a little bit. Oh, today is Wednesday. I got to go to this women's conference and listen to this woman talk about mental health, mental illness. But I'll go, right? You're sitting there. You're kind of dragging along. The day is not going so well, maybe the week, the month, right? So something is not working the way that it should. So that is the difference with mental health and mental illness. If you look at this screen, another thing, sometimes people think, people with mental illness, right? Oh, just get over it. Come on, pick yourself up, right? So if you've ever been around a person that's maybe depressed or has a lower mood, I've had clients tell me that their family members are like, oh, come on, just pick yourself up. You can do it. You know, you just need some sunshine and a Mountain Dew. You'll be all right, right? But it's not overcome through willpower. That's what one of the things says back here, right? So you can't just sit down and, I'm healthy. I no longer have this mental illness. I no longer, I'm anxious or depressed. I'm no longer bipolar. So it's not something that you can overcome by willpower. Sometimes it's talking it out with talk therapy. Sometimes it may be the medication route. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer, right? Okay. Mental illnesses can strike anyone. So no one in this room can say it won't happen to me, right? Because it can be anybody. So it just doesn't happen to people that sit on the left side of the table or the right side of the table, or the people that grew up on the south side of town, right? Or the people that grew up on the west coast versus the east coast. Anyone at any point in time in their life can be diagnosed with a mental illness, okay? So the statistics for adults is that 1 in 5 adults can be diagnosed with a mental illness. So I want you to look around this room, look around your table. If we started counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to do a little demonstration. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Raise your hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Raise your hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Raise your hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Raise your hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Raise your hand, please. Rhonda? Thank you. All right. Raise them high. All right. So just in this section alone, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individuals just in this section of the room. Put your hands down. Thank you. That could potentially be diagnosed with a mental illness. So if we continue throughout the room, obviously there would be more people. So what does that tell you?
You know somebody with mental illness.
You could potentially know someone that's diagnosed with a mental illness, right? So it impacts everyone. So if we think about the people that raise their hands, potentially, right? If they're your friend, your coworker, your family, right? Does that impact you?
Yes.
Right? So a lot of times people think that's their issue, right? I'm going to just keep walking. What would happen as providers if we did that? I hear some, What would happen? So if you're in public health and clients are coming in and they've got mental illnesses and you don't address it, what happens? I'm sorry, a little bit louder. Can it get out of control? Shut down? Okay. So it's not the easiest thing to address, right? But if we never address it, it just gets worse, right? All right, so these are some of the statistics that I talked about. Does anyone work with homeless population at all? Yes? Okay, some. All right. So there's a statistic that an estimated 26% of homeless adults staying in shelters live with a serious mental illness. We know that there is also a percentage of those individuals that are incarcerated as well. So when we look across the board, whether it's the school system, the juvenile justice system, the jail system, homeless population, doesn't matter where we look, there is a percentage of individuals that have a diagnosable mental illness. So anywhere that any of us work in this room, it's going to impact someone that we work with, whether it's the people that we work with or the clients that we serve. Does that make sense? Okay. Again, this is more statistics about minorities and mental health. Now we're going to talk about stigma, because this is huge, especially when we're talking about mental illness, right? People see me coming and they're just like, here she comes. We don't want to talk about it, right? Certain communities that I try to go into, they're not having it. They don't want to talk about it because guess what? Oh, it's not happening here. Are you sure? Right? We don't have that problem here. But from what we just talked about in this room, it impacts everyone. So when you think about mental illness, what are some things that come to mind of what you hear people say? Crazy, right? That's number one, out the gate. Yeah, I was diagnosed with mental illness. I'm like, girl, we didn't know you was crazy for real. Right? You're like, what? I'm not crazy. I might be struggling with depression or I might be struggling with anxiety, but does that make me crazy? What are some other things that you hear? Weak, right? So if I'm depressed, it might be weak, right? I'll share a little bit of a story, a little self-disclosure. After the birth of my first daughter, I suffered from postpartum depression. And when I started sharing this with friends and family, they're like, oh my God, what do you mean? Like, you're the strongest person I know. I said, and strong has to do what with postpartum? Well, but you're just strong. I mean, how'd you end up with something like that? So sometimes the things that people say can be very stigma-oriented, right? And if I were not comfortable with what I was dealing with and wasn't educated, right, I would have said, well, I'm probably just going to sit here and suffer because what are people going to think, right? They're going to call me crazy. But instead, I decided I'm going to get help. I'm going to go talk to my physician. So if you guys don't take any other messages from today, know that when stigma comes in connection with mental illness, it can be very damaging to the person that is struggling. So we need to support, whether it's clients, coworkers, family members, you always need to support that individual by asking simple question. What do you need? How can I help? How hard is that? So I want you to look at the person next to you. Say, what is it that you need? What do you need? How can I help you?
That's the famous one. Every Walmart employee wear lay back thing trying to help.
It's true. So how does that feel when the person next to you just looked at you and asked, what did you need? How does that feel for you? Comforting, right? So if we're in a conference, right, and the person sitting next to you asked, what did you need? And you all said it felt good, it felt comforting. Imagine what people that have been struggling for years, right? What that feels like for them, for somebody to just say, you know what? All paperwork aside, everything aside, what is it that you need? How do you think that could potentially change that person's life? Right? From the stigma of being crazy, right, or weak, to someone just saying, everything off the table, what is it that you need? Very powerful. All right, so depression. We all know about it, right? How many of you know somebody that has been diagnosed with depression? Take a look around the room. Look at all the hands that are up. Right? Very common. The number one diagnosed mental illness is depression. Can be situational, or it could be long-term. So people can go through certain situations where they are depressed because of what has happened. Doesn't mean that they can't recover, just means that it is situational. The loss of a loved one, right? Maybe it was a home fire or something traumatic that happened within the community. But then people shift and they're okay after a certain period of time. Anxiety. What does anxiety look like? When you hear the word anxiety, what comes up? Stress. Louder. Panic. Constant thought. Struggle. Right? Not being able to breathe. Yeah, all of that. So when I treat clients in my office and they talk about anxiety, they say, I just can't get it to stop. Like everything just keeps going. It's going, it's going, it's going. I lay down, it's still going. I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm panicked. Like I feel like I can't breathe. Right? The most severe cases are my clients that call and they're like, I'm on my way to the hospital, I'm having a heart attack. I'm like, are you sure? Yeah, I am. I know it's a heart attack. It's the big one, so I probably won't be at my appointment later today. Like, all right. Well, if it's the big one, I'll figure it out. But just call me back once you get to the hospital. They call me back and they're like, how'd you know? It's all good. So we talk about it. We work through it. They learn coping skills to deal with the anxiety. It's nothing fun to deal with. But hey, some people are diagnosed with it. It's about learning, again, those skills to decrease that anxiety, that panic, the constant thoughts. PTSD. Look at all these different things that are kind of surrounding this PTSD. Hyper-alertness, nightmares, rage, numb, dreams, low self-esteem, stress, heightened, combat, avoidance. There's all of these different words, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of the young adults that I treat right now come from the inner city. One of the things that they talk about is the constant violence that they see, whether it's in the home or in the communities around them. Their friends that have gotten shot, their friends that have gotten killed, the constant fighting, whether it's people trying to fight them and they're running, or other people that, are fighting around them, okay? PTSD is huge. How many of you know or have worked with clients that maybe struggle with PTSD? Yikes. It's a lot. What are some of the things that you hear when people talk about PTSD? Flashbacks. Nightmares. Guilt. Anger. Fear. Yep. How does this translate with some of the things that we've already talked about? With the depression, with the anxiety. Now we're talking about PTSD. They merge, right? A lot of this sounds familiar. So a lot of these symptoms sometimes come together. So it's clients that I've treated with PTSD, a lot of times they're depressed. Why? Because the nightmares, they can't sleep, so they haven't slept for days. So their attitudes are a little wacky, right? And if I got a wacky attitude and I ain't slept for days, guess the first place I'm not going tomorrow morning? I ain't going to work because I don't want to see the people. I don't want to deal with the problems. I'm stressed, I'm struggling. So then you have lack of resources, right? So now I don't have the finances to take care of the things that I need to take care of. It's a completely downward spiral. So the importance, again, of knowing what's here is how can we help, right? What do we need? All right, bipolar disorder. What does this look like to you? First thing that you saw. Segmented roller coaster. Anybody know anybody diagnosed with bipolar disorder? Yeah. Tough stuff, right? Yeah. Manic phases. Depressed phases. Goes up and down. Thank you. Up and down. How many of you like roller coasters? She's like, right here! That would be me. Yeah. But when it's an emotional roller coaster, right? It's a little bit of a different scenario, right? And many of us, because we're women, and this handsome gentleman here, right? We may have just in regular life gone through some little emotional roller coasters. But the dramatics of bipolar disorder can be very traumatic for the person that is diagnosed with bipolar disorder and very impacting in their life and how they operate. Schizophrenia. So things may seem really normal, I'm going to say to me, right? So I may think that the little Twitter bird really does deliver messages to me. And I'm going to try to convince everyone in this room, when we go out here, Twitter bird is going to be out here delivering messages, right? But I also know that, you know, all the airplanes fly through clouds and it rains all the time. Does this make sense to anybody? All planes fly through clouds when it's raining, all the time. Are you trying to figure out what I'm saying? That's what it's like. Yeah. Right? That it makes sense to me in my mind, right? And I'm trying to convince everybody else. Even if you don't, I don't even care. So schizophrenia has to do with what's real and what's not real. And a lot of times with the person that's diagnosed, a lot of the things that they think are not real. All right. Does anybody know what this week is? Suicide Awareness Week. Okay? I guess probably the most important thing to know is depression that is left untreated. We kind of talked about this earlier. Any type of mental illness that goes untreated can potentially get worse. When we talk about depression, when it's left untreated, will get worse, and there is the potential for a person to take their own life. Okay? So again, when I go back to that one question that we asked, what is it that you need? How can I help? If you notice things with people that are different, right? A person, they say, if they, you know that they've got belongings, things that they love, red Corvette, right? All of a sudden that red Corvette, they're like, hey, here are the keys. I know you've liked it for years. I'm going to give it to you. Oh, you know that jewelry that you liked? I got my jewelry case right here. You can have it. You know, I'm just trying to downsize a little bit. That red jacket that you like that I got, I'm going to go ahead and give it to you. Yeah. Hey, you know, I'm going to probably just put you on my bank account because, you know, I was just thinking, you know, probably need to have somebody else on there. And, oh, do you know who my mortgage is through? So that, you know, if anything were to happen, then you could take care of that for me. What does that sound like? Right? Preparation. So you have to always be listening and mindful of what people are saying, because sometimes it's those little things, like giving away things that mean the most to them, right? Making plans. I'm not going to be here much longer. Or it was really good to see you. I probably won't ever see you again. We have to listen to those things. Risk factors. We talked about some of these. Exposure to violence during childhood, poverty, anger, anxiety, depression. These are all different factors that can potentially shift into mental illness. And especially if a person is, if you kind of look through this list, if they are experiencing this long term, they're at a higher risk of developing some type of mental illness, whether it's depression, anxiety, PTSD, what have you. Protective factors kind of go along with coping and mental illness. When you think about protective factors, these are things that can protect people and help them, right, to either deal with and cope with life, their diagnosis, or to keep them going on the right track. Support systems are huge. Is it easy to walk through life with no support? No. Okay, so we all agree on that. What are some other ways that people can cope with just everyday life? Throw it out there. What are things that you do?
Hang out with my friends.
Hang out with your friends, meditate, read.
Go to therapy.
Therapy. Yes, give me a good name. People think that therapy's bad. Like, don't put me out of a job just yet. What else? Exercise, showers, right? What was it? Coloring, yes. Volunteering, giving back. So anything having to do with gratitude, right? Puts you in a better place. All right? I want you to look at the person next to you and say, I'm just so glad you're here today. Did they smile at you? Did the person next to you smile? Yes? If they didn't, tell them again. Keep saying it until they smile.